Hey guys, my name is Rob Noire, and today I have a video for you all about the N64. Now, if you know me, if you know the channel, if you've watched for a while, you know that I am a huge fan of the N64. When I was a kid growing up, we originally had an NES. We had that for a while until I was around like 7 or 8, which is when me and my two sisters pooled our Christmas money and we bought an N64 for ourselves. And I played the shit out of that console as a kid. It probably did well by me until I was 14, 15. I had it for a good 6, 7 years before I ever wanted another console. And I absolutely love the N64. It was eventually replaced for me by the PlayStation 2, but even though I did have a PlayStation 2, we still kept the N64 hooked up to a TV, and we would still go back to it and play it every once in a while. And I bring that up because the NES was basically shoved in a cupboard and never seen again for years when we got the N64, but the PlayStation 2, we had that, it was great, N64 was still hooked up. And as a kid, I probably played that every week for sure, probably 4 or 5 days out of the week for at least an hour each day. I have a lot of fond memories of the console, the kids from up the street coming down to play Super Smash Bros. Or Mario Kart. I was especially good at Mario Kart 64, by the way. Way back in the day, I did a Let's Play of Mario Kart 64 with Phil, a friend of mine, and I absolutely schooled him. So I still got it after all these years. But I played the crap out of the N64. And I feel like the N64 kind of gets a bad rap these days because it was the beginning of 3D gaming and there was a lot of stuff they hadn't really worked out, but there was a crap ton of really fun classic games on the system. Banjo-Kazooie, for example, is one of my favorite games of all time. Zelda Ocarina of Time, also really amazing game. Mario 64, Mario Kart, GoldenEye, Conker's Bad Fur Day. There were a lot of really great, iconic games on the N64. And a lot of franchises kind of launched on the N64. It's where Nintendo kind of tested out a bunch of shit before later on giving it better releases. And it's honestly just a great system that I absolutely love. It would probably be my second or third favorite console of all time, even though it hasn't necessarily aged the greatest. And as of a few months ago, I can actually now say that I have the complete collection of games that I had as a kid on the N64. I didn't have many, but every game that I did have as a kid, I now own as an adult. And another thing I want to mention is that when I no longer had an N64, I did play a lot of these games using emulators on my PC. And so I'm pretty familiar with what they look like and how they play on emulators. I did a video on the Super NT the other week where I really break down software emulation and talk about all the things that are good and all the things that are bad about it. So I'm not going to get super in-depth here, but as somebody who played the actual console, the actual hardware, constantly, emulation just has never really measured up. It never feels right, especially on the N64. The controls were already kind of an issue on that console, but in emulators, I find it's just so terrible. And so many of the games are incredibly glitchy. Here in Mario Kart, you can see a bunch of issues here. Here in Quest 64, all the text has this purple stuff around it. A lot of the games just plain don't work. There's a lot of issues with emulation for the N64, even today in 2018. So I always found it kind of not the greatest solution. There's also the fact that it just looks really bland and washed out, and just overall I never really liked emulating N64 games. I did it at the time because I still wanted to play these awesome games, but even back then I knew that it was not the greatest solution. Also worth mentioning is that when I got my Wii U day one, I actually went out and I downloaded a couple N64 ROMs, one of the main ones being Donkey Kong 64, and the way it handled with the input lag and everything made it literally unplayable to me. It was incredibly disappointing. And so that's why I basically eventually went back to the original hardware. And so after having said this, if you're familiar with the channel, you might be wondering why you don't see more N64 game playthroughs. There really hasn't been a lot on the channel. Back in the day, I did do some ROM games like Quest 64, like Mario Kart, and a few others, but there was only ever a couple episodes of that. And the only ongoing N64 series that I've done on the N64 would be Quest 64, and that's because I kind of got roped into it. So if I love the N64 so much, why don't I play more N64 games? Why don't you see them here on the channel? Well, it honestly comes down to, more than anything, the video quality. As I've mentioned, the N64 hasn't aged the best, and you can really see it on an HDTV. The N64 was Nintendo's first real foray into 3D graphics. I mean, there was some 3D-ish stuff on the Super Nintendo, like Donkey Kong Country, or like the Super Mario Kart used Mode 7 to kind of give a 3D effect. There was nothing truly 3D. The N64 was really where it started. And because of that, it had a lot of flaws. A lot of those things were kind of hidden by the fact that you were playing on a CRT with scanlines and low resolutions, but on an HDTV in 1080p or 4K, it is incredibly obvious in your face, and you can't really overlook it. And I always want to put out videos that are the best quality that I can, and I always want to be playing stuff in the best quality that I can. And because the N64 has such bad video out, I haven't really felt I can offer that as videos on the N64. It's why I haven't really done a whole lot of Let's Plays on it. The N64 uses the standard AV out cables that many Nintendo consoles have used for a while. The Super Nintendo used the same thing. The NES used actual just straight up RCA cables, but the GameCube also used the same kind of cable to get your video out of the console, and it doesn't look good, it doesn't upscale well, it's blurry, it's low quality, and it just kind of overall looks like crap. And for the longest time, I just kind of accepted that this is how an N64 looks. This is how N64 games look. It's the best that you can do with the console, unfortunately. And it's kind of a real bummer because I definitely remember the games looking way better than they do nowadays. And it kind of sucks to go into a game that you remember looking really great, and then you just get this blurry, shitty mess. It's just really a downer, and it doesn't really make it that much fun to play. So you might be wondering why I'm talking about all this. And that's because not that long ago, a mod came out for the N64 called the UltraHDMI. It was designed by a guy named Marshall, who I believe lives down in Australia, and it is touted as being the best way to play N64 games in HD on the original hardware. Supposed to be better than ROMs, better than everything. And I had honestly wanted to get my hands on this for the longest time, and there was always something in the way. Like, to be able to buy the mod kit, you have to do a pre-order process, and they always sell out like immediately. And then there was also trying to schedule my modder to actually get the job done, and it's a very difficult mod to do to your N64, so there was that as well, and it was just kind of a headache. But finally, after all this time, I got my hands on the UltraHDMI mod for the N64. I got my console modded, and I've been using it. And now I've done a bunch of different reviews on consoles, like I've done the Analog Super NT, the Xbox One X, the Nintendo Switch, and for all those reviews, I pretty much did them before I actually had played the console, and then I would play the console in the middle of the video, and then I would end the video by giving my thoughts on it. But I have already been playing the UltraHDMI N64. I've had it for about 2 weeks, and I have been playing the shit out of it, testing the crap out of this thing. And the reason why I didn't wait to do this kind of before and after thing like I usually do is because I have a ton of experience with the N64. Like I mentioned, as a kid for like 6-7 years, I played that thing 5 days a week for hours and hours and hours. And then even as an adult past that for another 4 or 5 years, I would still play it probably once every couple weeks, definitely at least a few times a month. And even now that I'm doing videos on YouTube, I have been playing N64 here and there. So I'm not necessarily an expert, but I have like over a decade of experience playing this thing. So it wasn't something where I'd be able to test it out and tell you immediately how I liked it, like within a few hours. You know what I mean? I also got a few other cool things done to my N64, like now it has a blue LED light instead of the standard red, and it's been fixed up a bit, but nothing too extreme. The main focus of this is the UltraHDMI mod. And one of the cool things about this mod is it does use an HDMI cable that comes out the back here, but you can also still use the original AV out, and you can actually broadcast with both at the exact same time. So technically you could hook up 2 TVs and be showing the same thing on both TVs at the exact same time. So I'm gonna level with you completely right now. When I first got the UltraHDMI modded N64, I plugged it in, booted it up with Mario Kart in, and I was extremely unimpressed impressed. As someone who had played a lot of emulators with these N64 games, as well as having played them on like the Wii U and other consoles, it really didn't look that great. Like, it really did not impress me. And I've been using an upscaler to play my N64 on my HDTVs, and the UltraHDMI mod at first glance didn't look really much better than what my upscaler could offer. And it wasn't until really playing for several hours that I really came to appreciate this mod, and it made me realize two very important things that you have to understand. And the first point I'm going to touch on here, which is probably the biggest one, is that no amount of upscaling or special effects or whatever can make a game with shitty graphics look good. Now, I'm not saying that all N64 games have shitty graphics. It really varies from title to title, especially games that use the expansion pack. Those tend to look better, and there's a lot of games that actually get a boost in textures and resolution when you use the expansion pack on them, and there's a couple games like Donkey Kong 64 and Majora's Mask, which you can only play if you have it. At the end of the day, you can't fix bad graphics just by making them clear. And this is a really important point that you have to understand. And on the actual website where you can buy this mod, it really emphasizes this point where it can't fix bad graphics. It's just going to give you the best possible resolution for these bad graphics. And so that's why when I first popped it in, having played ROMs, emulators, and having played downloaded versions and remasters, it really didn't impress me much. And honestly, at the time, I was really worried that I'd actually wasted my money. Like, I was feeling like I really wasn't getting much out of this, and I could have spent that money on something else. But as I mentioned, after having played it for a while, it started to sink in how great it is. And so the other point that I want to touch on that is one of the reasons why I didn't immediately, take to this thing is because I actually have been using a really good upscaler. Now, a lot of you, if you use N64, you probably plug it just right into your HDTV through RCA jacks, and that's all you ever see. For me, I have to use an upscaler if I want to record footage because I can only record over HDMI cables. I can't plug in my RCA cables into my capture card. So I bought an upscaler several years ago, and it was well reviewed on Amazon, but it was pretty cheap. It's nothing compared to the OSSC or the FrameMeister, which are considered to be extremely good upscalers. This was just a cheap $50 thing that had pretty good reviews. So I've been running my N64, my NES, everything through this upscaler. And I've always thought of it as kind of like a shitty upscaler, because the stuff I play doesn't actually look that great when I use it. But what having the UltraHDMI N64 mod made me realize is that it's actually a pretty good upscaler, especially on games that have decent graphics on the N64 like Mario Kart. It actually does a pretty good job. It's on the games that have really, really bad graphics, for example, Quest 64, that it kind of really doesn't do a good job. And this is where the HD modded N64 completely blew my upscaler out of the water, in that it made even the games with really bad graphics look way better. It made them look way, way better than I was able to get out of a regular upscaler. So the HD modded N64 can output in pretty much any resolution you need. I generally do 1080p 60, but if you're somebody who likes 720p, it also supports that, no problem. Much like the Super NT or other HDMI modded consoles, you can access a menu by clicking a button combination on your controller, and this will let you modify the various settings. One of the things to note is that when you press a button to modify a setting on the menu, it will do that action in-game. So I remember at one point I was pressing start to do something on the menu, and it was unpausing my game behind the menu, and I was like, oh fuck, and it was kind of annoying. So just account for that, do it on screens where that's not a problem, or you can also just kind of use the D-pad to go through shit and not have to actually press on anything. Another thing to mention is that if you find settings that you like, you have to click save, because it doesn't automatically save. If you turn off, it's going to wipe everything. What I would suggest when setting this up is to click on the retro mode and then tweak the settings from there, because it does a very good job, the retro mode, of emulating what we used to see on CRTs as kids. And then you can just modify the individual things to get a more natural look, or something more like what you remember, or something that just works better with your TV in general. And one of the cool things about the HD modded N64 is that it does have a scanline feature. And scanlines are something that a lot of retro gamers think are super important, and I'll be honest, I've always completely brushed them aside before playing the N64. Like when I play Super Nintendo or NES, I'm used to playing those as ROMs more than on the actual hardware. That's going to change because now I have a Super NT and I'm playing all my original carts, but I played them more as ROMs or downloaded on other consoles than I did on the actual CRT back in the day, so scanlines never really meant much to me. But playing the N64, that's something that I did play on a CRT with scanlines. And it was the kind of thing where I turned it on when I first got the console and I didn't really like the way it looked because I was still more used to nowadays not having the scan lines. It's something that I've kind of hovered back and forth on for a while before finally deciding that yes, I absolutely like the way scan lines look. I understand why people go so crazy for them, especially on games that are kind of low quality like the N64. A lot of them weren't the best looking. It really hides some of the rough edges and just smooths it all out and makes it look like way better, at least in my opinion. It definitely improves it from what regular ROMs look like, and to me this was when I really felt like the UltraHDMI was shining and like doing a really good job. And to be fair, you can do scan lines in a lot of old emulators, but I feel like with the washed out graphics and everything, it just doesn't really capture the same feel or the same look. But with the HD modded N64, it really does. Like, it feels like I'm playing on a CRT when I was a kid, and that's really awesome. It managed to kind of recapture the magic. I might suggest also turning on Gamma Boost to brighten up the picture a little bit if you do use scan lines, and the scan lines do look a little bit better and more natural if you play your game in 720p, not 1080p. So that's something to keep in mind, but personally I don't find they look that bad in 1080p. So I've been showing some footage captured from the HD modded N64 throughout this video, but obviously the big question is, how does it compare to the other video options that you have? How does this compare to, say, a Wii U downloaded title, to playing a ROM on your PC, to the actual video out from the N64? And does it look better with scan lines or does it look better without? So I've played a bunch of games, and right now I'm going to put up all the footage on screen for you to have a look at and compare and kind of decide for yourself. So here we go.
Clippy, watch out! Bogey on your tail!
Whoa! Help me! Thanks, Bob. I thought they had me.
Up, yo, up, performance for you. If you know the words, you can join in too. Put your hands together if you wanna clap. As we take you through this monkey rap. He's the leader of the bunch. You know him well. He's finally back to kick some tail. His coconut gun can fire in spurts. If he shoots ya, it's gonna hurt. He's big.
So an HD modded N64 is not necessarily for everyone. It is quite expensive, like most of this retro gaming new age stuff, so it's definitely not something you're just going to run out and buy with pocket change, and because of the limited availability, it's really hard to get your hands on it, unfortunately. I mean, you can probably find pre-modded consoles on eBay, but they're going to be selling for way more than what you're going to pay normally. So I mean, if you're super in a rush for it, you can do that. But it's already quite expensive, and I wouldn't recommend that. Especially, you're not going to know how good of a job the guy who modded your console did. Like, it could be a shit show, a broken piece of mess, you never know. So it's definitely not for everyone. It is expensive, but for someone like me who grew up with the N64, this has really changed things for me. Like, now I'm actually excited to plug my N64 in and play it, which is something that I couldn't say before when I was using the original video output. It just looked too blurry, too much like crap. It really didn't do it for me. But the mod that I have now installed really recaptures the magic that I felt when playing this console when I was a kid. And that's kind of like the most important thing, at least in my opinion. As I mentioned, it has tons of options for resolutions. It sounds great. It can output in 2 different ways at the same time, which is really weird because pretty much no other console really can do this, but kind of awesome, especially if you want a multi-screen setup. Like, hey, maybe you can do Mario Kart and you can crop like your TV so that it just shows one person on each screen. I don't know. You could figure out a lot of shit that you could do with this. It's pretty great. It looks really good. The only problem is the availability and the price tag, but overall, I feel like this is one hell of a step up. And as you probably saw in the comparison before this, it is one hell of a boost from the original video output. It's pretty comparable to the ROMs, although I find it doesn't look so washed out, it doesn't look so fake, it obviously doesn't glitch, like it's just a more authentic, natural look for the N64, and I do find it superior to ROMs in every single way, especially it has absolutely no input lag, which is amazing. I mean, you do have to play it with the original N64 controller or a controller that works with the actual hardware, which I'm not the biggest fan of the N64 controller as a guy who has pretty big hands, but still I feel like that's a small price to pay, and there is progress being done on making better N64 controllers. Probably there'll be a video on that at some point in the future. So in the end, an HD modded N64 is pretty fucking awesome. Like, I'm very happy with my purchase. As I mentioned, I wasn't super happy with the purchase when I first got it and I first plugged it in because my expectations were really high, but in the end, it delivered on what it promised. And after having sunk a few hours into it, I was really able to appreciate the beauty of this mod and everything that it offers. So if you're a huge fan of N64 and you're able to get your hands on this thing, I would highly recommend. And yeah, guys, that's pretty much all I have to say on this. I think it's really awesome that these days there's so many options now to play your favorite consoles in HD perfect quality, with scan lines if you want them, however you want. Like, it's really great. I mean, there's NES, Super Nintendo, N64, even GameCube now has an HDMI adapter. Like, we're living in the future of the past, you know what I mean? And I just think it's awesome. I'm super happy with this. And yeah, guys, if you have any questions, definitely let me know in the comments below. And as always, I will see you in the next one. Hey guys, my name is Rob Noire, and today I have a video for you all about the Super NT, this thing right here. Now this is a follow-up to the NT, kind of a spur of the moment thing and kind of a more, oh god, I should get this kind of thing. And so I figured as a late adopter I should do a little bit of a video on it and maybe